Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Travel Stories. Tonight, we're traveling together to a place where mountains pierce the sky and silence feels like something you can touch. We're heading to a cabin nestled deep within the Canadian Rockies, where the only neighbors are the spruce trees and the occasional elk wandering through the clearing. This is a journey into stillness, into the kind of quiet that exists when you're surrounded by ancient peaks and endless forests. So settle yourself comfortably wherever you are. Let your breathing slow and deepen, and allow yourself to drift into this mountain world with me. The drive to reach the cabin takes you away from everything familiar. You leave behind the highway, then the paved roads, and eventually even the gravel becomes rougher, more primitive, until you're navigating a track that seems to exist only because others have passed this way before. The trees close in on either side, their branches forming a canopy that filters the sunlight into dancing patterns across the hood of your vehicle. These are the lower elevations of the Rockies, where lodgepole pines stand straight and tall, their trunks rising like columns in a natural cathedral. Between them, you catch glimpses of what lies ahead, those peaks that define this landscape, their summits still holding on to snow, even though it's summer down here in the valley. The Canadian Rockies stretch for over 1,200 kilometers, a spine of stone running through British Columbia and Alberta. They're young mountains, geologically speaking, thrust upward through tremendous forces over millions of years. The rocks here tell stories of ancient seas and tropical climates, of pressures and heat that transformed limestone and shale into the towering formations you see now. Mount Robson, the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies, reaches nearly 4,000 meters into the sky. Though you can't see it from where you're driving, you can feel the presence of these giants all around you, the way they shape the weather, the way they draw moisture from Pacific winds and create their own microclimates in the valleys below. The track you're following winds deeper into the forest. You pass a meadow where wildflowers nod in the breeze, purple lupines and yellow arnica creating splashes of color against the green. A creek runs alongside the road for a while, its water milky with glacial flour, that fine sediment ground from rock by the slow, patient work of ice. The sound of it reaches you even through the closed windows, a constant murmur that becomes part of the soundtrack of this place. Eventually, the track ends at a small clearing. There, set back among the trees, is the cabin. It's smaller than you might have imagined. A simple structure of weathered logs with a pitched roof designed to shed the heavy snows of winter. The wood has aged to a silvery grey, except where the afternoon sun catches it, bringing out hints of honey and amber in the grain. Smoke rises lazily from the chimney, a thin ribbon that disperses into the canopy above. Someone has been here before you, perhaps just this morning, to light the fire and make sure everything is ready. But now there's no one else around. This is your sanctuary for the next few days. You step out of the vehicle, and the first thing that strikes you is the quiet. It's not absolute silence, not quite, but it's a quality of stillness that city dwellers rarely experience. The wind whispers through the highest branches of the spruce trees. Somewhere a raven calls, that deep, throaty sound that seems to come from the earth itself. The creak you passed earlier is still audible, though from here it's more felt than heard, a low frequency that you sense rather than consciously notice. The air is different too. It's thin up here, crisp and clean in a way that makes you want to breathe deeply. There's a scent of pine resin and damp earth, and underneath it all, that peculiar mineral smell that comes from the rocks themselves, from the mountains that tower somewhere beyond the trees. The temperature is cooler than you expected, even though it's July. At this elevation, which you estimate to be around 1,800 meters, the summers are brief and the nights can approach freezing even in the warmest months. You approach the cabin slowly, taking it all in. The front door is solid wood, fitted with old iron hinges that have begun to rust at the edges. There's no lock, just a simple latch. In places like this, trust is still currency. Next to the door, a stack of firewood reaches nearly to the eaves, split logs arranged with the kind of precision that speaks to long winter evenings when there's nothing to do but prepare for tomorrow's cold. The pieces are mostly spruce and lodgepole pine, light woods that burn fast and hot, perfect for the quick warmth you'll need on chilly mornings and cool evenings. You lift the latch and push the door inward. It swings on those old hinges with a soft creak, and you step across the threshold into the cabin's single main room. The space is modest, perhaps 5 meters by 6, with a ceiling that slopes upward to a peak where rough-hewn beams cross overhead. To your left, there's a kitchen area, if you can call it that. A small counter, a propane camp stove, some shelves holding mismatched plates and cups, a few pots and pans hanging from hooks. Everything is clean, but well used, carrying the patina of years and the hands of countless visitors who've passed through this space. The dominant feature of the room is the wood stove. It sits in the center of the cabin, a black iron belly that radiates warmth in concentric waves. Someone has already fed it, and through the grated front, you can see the glow of coals and the flicker of flame working through a fresh log. The heat feels wonderful after the cool air outside. You move toward it instinctively, holding your hands out to warm them, even though they're not really cold. Behind the stove, against the far wall, there's a simple bed frame with a thick mattress and several wool blankets folded at the foot. The blankets are that particular shade of cream and brown that seems to belong to mountain places, heavy and slightly scratchy, but perfect for piling on when the temperature drops after sunset. Next to the bed, a small table holds an oil lamp with a glass chimney, the kind that casts a soft golden light so different from electric bulbs. But it's the windows that truly define this space. There are two of them, larger than you'd expect in such a rustic structure, facing south and west to capture as much light as possible. Through them, you can see the forest, those tall spruce and fir trees with their dark green needles, and beyond them, just visible through a gap in the canopy, the white-topped peak of a mountain. You don't know its name, but it doesn't matter. It's there, constant and ancient, a presence that will anchor your days here. You unpack slowly, finding places for your few belongings. There's no rush, no schedule to keep. That's one of the first things you notice about being in a place like this. Time moves differently. Without the constant pinging of notifications, without the hum of traffic or the glow of streetlights, you begin to attune yourself to older rhythms. The position of the sun becomes important. The quality of light tells you what part of the day you're in. Your body starts to remember what it knew before civilization taught it otherwise. Outside the window, the afternoon light is beginning to change. It's still bright, but there's a softening happening, a warming of the color as the sun tracks lower in the western sky. The mountains in this part of the Rockies create dramatic effects with light. Because they're so high and the valleys so deep, you get long shadows even in summer, and the interplay between sun and shade creates an ever-changing landscape of contrasts. You decide to explore a bit before dinner. There's a narrow path leading away from the cabin, marked by smooth stones that someone has placed at intervals. You follow it into the forest, moving slowly, not from caution, but from a desire to really see this place, to notice the details that might escape a hurried glance. The forest here is primarily subalpine, a transitional zone between the denser montane forests at lower elevations and the alpine tundra that begins above the tree line. The trees are mostly Engelmann spruce, and subalpine fir, both species perfectly adapted to the short growing seasons and heavy snows of this elevation. Their branches grow in that characteristic downward sweep, shaped by years of bearing winter's weight. In places, you see evidence of what the locals call krummholz, those twisted, stunted trees that mark the edge of where trees can survive at all. They're not here yet, but you're approaching that boundary. Between the trees, the understory is rich with life. There are huckleberry bushes, their leaves a glossy green, though it's too early for fruit. You notice the delicate white flowers of bunchberry, and here and there the red stems of devil's club, a plant you've been warned to avoid for its nasty spines. The ground is soft underfoot, covered with a thick layer of needles and moss that absorbs your footsteps. It's like walking on carpet, this accumulation of organic matter that has been building for decades, maybe centuries. The light filters through the canopy in shafts, illuminating particles of pollen and dust that drift lazily in the still air. You stop to watch them for a moment, these tiny dancers caught in beams of gold. The effect is almost mystical, as if the forest itself is glowing from within. A sound makes you turn. There, not 20 meters away, a red squirrel sits on a branch, scolding you with that distinctive rattling chatter they make. It's a tiny creature, barely larger than your fist, with tufted ears and bright, intelligent eyes. You watch as it grabs a spruce cone and begins to work at it with impressive efficiency, its teeth stripping away the scales to get at the seeds within. Pieces fall to the ground below, adding to a pile of discarded cone parts that tells you this is a favorite feeding spot. The squirrel pauses, looks directly at you, seems to make a judgment about whether you're a threat, then goes back to its work. You continue walking. The path leads upward slightly, gaining elevation in a series of gentle switchbacks. Your breathing comes a little harder up here. The air is noticeably thinner than what you're used to, and your body is still adjusting. But there's something invigorating about it too. This slightly oxygen-deprived state that makes you feel more alert, more present in your own skin. After perhaps 15 minutes of walking, the trees begin to thin. You're approaching an opening, a natural meadow that spreads across a south-facing slope. The change is dramatic. One moment you're in the cool dimness of the forest, and the next you're standing in full sunlight, surrounded by an explosion of color. Wildflowers carpet the meadow in swaths of purple, yellow, red, and white. There are lupines, their tall spikes of blue-purple flowers swaying gently. Indian paintbrush adds splashes of red-orange, and the yellow of arnica glows almost fluorescent in the afternoon light. Small white stars of mountain avens dot the spaces between larger blooms. The diversity is staggering, and you realize that these plants have a narrow window to flower, seed, and prepare for winter. They can't afford to waste the brief mountain summer. The meadow also gives you your first unobstructed view of the mountains. They rise in ranks, peak after peak, receding into the distance, each one a slightly lighter shade of blue-gray than the one before it. The closest peaks still show their details, the striations in the rock layers, the patches of snow clinging to north-facing slopes, the vertical cliffs where nothing can grow. Further away, they become more abstract, mere suggestions of form against the sky. This is the heart of the Canadian Rockies, a landscape shaped by ice and time. During the last ice age, which ended only about 11,000 years ago, glaciers, thousands of meters thick, covered this entire region. As they advanced and retreated, they carved the valleys, sharpened the peaks, and left behind the U-shaped valleys and hanging valleys you can see from where you stand. The glaciers are much smaller now, restricted to the highest elevations, but they're still here, still doing their slow work of sculpting stone. You find a flat rock near the edge of the meadow and sit down, letting the warmth soak into you. The rock has been heated by hours of sun and feels good against your back. From here, you can see back down the slope to where the cabin sits among the trees, its grey roof barely visible. Smoke still rises from the chimney, a reassuring sign of warmth and shelter. A movement catches your eye. There, at the far edge of the meadow, a group of elk has emerged from the tree line. You count 5 of them, all females, moving with that particular grace that large animals sometimes possess. They're grazing on the meadow grasses, working their way slowly across the slope. One of them raises her head, ears swiveling, testing the air. She's caught your scent, or perhaps just sensed your presence. For a long moment, she stares directly at you. You remain perfectly still, hardly breathing. Then, apparently deciding you're not a threat, she goes back to feeding. Elk are among the most common large mammals in the Canadian Rockies, though their populations have fluctuated over the years due to predation, harsh winters, and human impact. These ones look healthy. Their coats are rich brown, almost reddish in the sunlight. They'll stay in these high meadows through the summer, feeding on the abundant grasses and forbs, building up fat reserves for the long winter ahead. Come autumn, the bulls will join them, their bugling calls echoing through the valleys during the rut. But for now, it's just these calm cows and their peaceful grazing. You watch them until they move out of sight, disappearing back into the forest on the far side of the meadow. The light is changing again. The sun is lower now, maybe an hour from touching the western peaks. The quality of the light has become richer, warmer, that golden hour that photographers love. The mountains seem to glow, and the meadow flowers appear luminous in the slanting rays. It's time to head back to the cabin. You stand, brushing dried grass from your pants, and start down the path. The walk back seems shorter, the way return journeys often do. By the time you reach the clearing where the cabin stands, the sun has dropped behind the western ridge, and though the sky is still bright, the forest floor has fallen into shadow. Inside the cabin, the fire in the wood stove has burned down to coals again. You open the front grate and add 2 more logs, watching as the flames begin to lick around them, gradually catching and spreading. There's an art to tending a wood fire, a rhythm you'll learn over the next few days. For now, you're just pleased when the logs catch properly and begin to burn with a satisfying crackle. You light the oil lamp as the room grows dimmer. The flame inside the glass chimney flickers for a moment before steadying, casting that warm, golden light across the room. It's not bright, not like electricity, but it's enough. More than enough, actually. There's something deeply satisfying about this simple light. The way it creates pools of warmth in the darkness. The way it makes shadows dance on the log walls. For dinner, you keep it simple. There's a small bag of rice you brought with you, some dried vegetables, a bit of cheese. You heat water on the propane stove and cook the rice, stirring in the vegetables as it steams. The cabin fills with the smell of food, simple but comforting. You eat slowly, sitting at the small table near the window, looking out at the deepening dusk. The forest is transforming as night approaches. The grey trunks of the trees are becoming darker, more substantial, while the spaces between them fill with shadow. Above the trees, the sky is still light, a deep blue that fades to pale green near the horizon. The first stars are appearing, faint at first, but growing brighter as the sky darkens. You've brought a book with you, but you find you have little interest in reading. Instead, you sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the night come on. This is something you haven't done in years, maybe ever. Just sitting, watching, with no other purpose or distraction. It feels strange at first, this deliberate stillness, but gradually you settle into it. The sounds of the forest at night are different from the daytime chorus. There's a great horned owl somewhere out there, its deep hooting carrying through the trees. You hear it call, and then, after a pause, an answering call from further away. They're establishing territories, or perhaps a pair is communicating, coordinating their night's hunting. Owls are common in these forests, though rarely seen. They hunt the snowshoe hares and red squirrels, using their exceptional hearing and silent flight to locate and capture prey in near total darkness. As full dark arrives, the stars emerge in force. You step outside, leaving the warm glow of the cabin behind, and look up. The sight stops you in your tracks. The sky is ablaze with stars, more than you've ever seen in your life. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a river of light, and individual stars are so numerous they seem to blur together. You can see the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, Orion's belt. These constellations have been guides for travelers for thousands of years. And here, far from any city lights, you understand why they were so important. The indigenous peoples who have lived in and around these mountains for millennia had their own names for the stars, their own stories written in the patterns overhead. The Stony Nakoda people, whose traditional territory includes much of this region, called these mountains the land of the spirits. For them, this was and is a sacred landscape, every peak and valley infused with meaning and story. They hunted here, gathered plants, traveled through the mountain passes on journeys that connected the plains to the west. Their presence in this land extends back more than 10,000 years, long before the mountains had their current English names. You stand there in the darkness, feeling very small beneath that vast sky, but not in a frightening way. It's more a sense of perspective, of understanding your place in something much larger. The cold begins to seep through your jacket, and eventually you head back inside, back to the warmth of the cabin and the soft light of the oil lamp. The bed, when you finally slide into it, is surprisingly comfortable. The mattress has a slight sag in the middle, but the wool blankets are heavy and warm. You lie there listening to the sounds of the cabin settling, the occasional pop from the wood stove as the fire burns down, the whisper of wind in the eaves. Sleep comes easily, deeper and more complete than you're all used to. You wake to absolute silence. For a moment, you're disoriented, unable to remember where you are. Then it comes back to you, and you lie still, listening. There's no sound at all, nothing. Even the wind has died during the night. It's the kind of silence that feels almost physical, a presence rather than an absence. The cabin is cold. Your breath makes small clouds in the air above the bed. The fire has gone out completely, reduced to ash in the stove. You know you should get up and relight it, but for a few more minutes, you stay under the blankets, warm and comfortable, watching as the darkness outside the window slowly gives way to the grey light of dawn. When you finally force yourself out of bed, the floor is shockingly cold against your bare feet. You quickly pull on layers, thick socks, a sweater, and set about reviving the fire. It takes a few tries. The kindling catches, but the larger pieces are stubborn. Eventually, though, you get a proper fire going, and the cabin begins to warm. You make coffee using the old percolator you found on the shelf. The process takes longer than you're used to, but there's something meditative about it. You watch through the small window in the stove door as the flames work on the new logs, and you listen to the percolator beginning to bubble and hiss on the propane burner. The light outside is growing stronger. You can see the shapes of individual trees now, and the meadow beyond the clearing is visible as a lighter patch against the dark forest. The sky is clear, promising another beautiful day. As the sun rises somewhere behind the eastern ridge, the quality of the light changes rapidly, moving from grey to pink to gold in the space of minutes. You take your coffee and step outside onto the small porch. The air is crisp and clean, cold enough to make your nose tingle. Everything is wet with dew, and spider webs strung between branches are highlighted by thousands of tiny water droplets, each one catching and refracting the early light. A sound makes you look up. High overhead, a raven is riding the thermal currents that are just beginning to form as the sun warms the air. It calls once, that deep primal sound, and then glides away toward the peaks. Ravens are sacred birds to many indigenous cultures in this region, clever and adaptable, survivors who thrive in these mountains year-round. Watching it, you feel a small surge of gratitude for being here, for having this moment. The morning unfolds slowly. You make a simple breakfast of oatmeal with dried fruit, eating it at the table, while watching the light transform the forest outside. There's no rush, nowhere you need to be. This, you realize, is what you came here for. Not just to see beautiful scenery, though that's certainly part of it, but to step out of the relentless forward motion of normal life. To simply be without agenda or expectation. After breakfast, you decide to explore in a different direction. There's another trail leading from the cabin, this one heading west toward a ridge you spotted yesterday. The trail is well maintained, probably by park service workers or volunteers who understand the importance of keeping these paths clear and safe. The morning forest has a different character than the evening one. Everything feels fresh, newly made. Drops of dew fall from branches as you brush past, soaking into your jacket. The bird activity is intense. You hear the rapid drumming of a woodpecker somewhere close by, and the cheerful caroling of a varied thrush. Small birds flit through the understory, too quick to identify, just flashes of movement and brief songs. The trail climbs steadily. Your legs begin to burn a little from the exertion and the altitude, but it's a good burn, the kind that reminds you you're alive and using your body. You pass through zones of different vegetation as you climb. The spruce and fir remain dominant, but you begin to see more whitebark pine, a hardy species that can survive at higher elevations. These trees often have a distinctive shape, twisted and irregular from years of battling wind and snow. They're also a keystone species in these ecosystems. Their large, nutritious seeds are eaten by Clark's nutcrackers, grizzly bears, and red squirrels. The nutcrackers, in particular, play a crucial role in dispersing the seeds, caching them throughout the forest, and inadvertently planting new trees when they fail to retrieve all their stores. The ridge, when you reach it, offers a spectacular view. You're standing at the edge of a steep drop-off, looking down into a valley you hadn't seen before. It's narrow and deep, with a creek running through the bottom, too far below to see clearly, but visible as a silver thread among the trees. The opposite side of the valley rises sharply, layer upon layer of rock faces and forested slopes, culminating in a jagged peak that still holds substantial patches of snow despite the summer season. You find a comfortable spot on the flat rock and sit down, pulling out the simple lunch you packed. Just some crackers, cheese, and apple. But eaten here, with this view, it tastes better than any restaurant meal you can remember. The silence is profound, broken only by the occasional whistle of a pika, those small, rabbit-like creatures that live among the rock slides and spend their summers gathering grass to dry for winter food. As you sit there, you notice how the light changes on the mountains. Clouds are building over the peaks, cumulus formations that will probably bring rain later this afternoon. This is typical weather for the Rockies in summer. Mornings are often clear, but as the day heats up and the sun warms the slopes, it creates convection currents that build clouds. By mid-afternoon, thunderstorms are common, though they usually pass quickly. The temperature up here on the ridge is noticeably cooler than down at the cabin. There's a steady breeze, nothing strong, but enough to remind you of your exposed position. You pull your jacket tighter and continue watching as the clouds grow and begin to obscure some of the higher peaks. Time loses meaning up here. You might have been sitting for 20 minutes or 2 hours. You're not entirely sure. The sun moves across the sky. The shadows shift and lengthen. And slowly you become aware that those clouds are moving closer, that the air has taken on a charged quality that speaks of approaching weather. The first drops of rain catch you about halfway back down the trail. They're fat and cold, splashing on your jacket with surprising force. You quicken your pace, not quite running, but moving with purpose. The rain intensifies rapidly. That's how mountain weather works. Within minutes, you're in a full downpour, water streaming down the trail, turning the dusty earth to mud. But you're not unhappy. There's something exhilarating about being caught in a mountain storm, about feeling the raw power of weather in a place where you can't just step inside at the first raindrop. You're soaked by the time you reach the cabin, water dripping from your hair and running down your neck, your boots squelching with each step. Inside, you peel off the wet layers and feed the fire, which has burned down to coals again. You hang your jacket and shirt on hooks near the stove, where they'll dry slowly in the heat. The drumming of rain on the roof is loud, insistent, a sound that's somehow both energizing and soporific. You make tea and curl up in the old armchair someone has placed near the window, wrapped in one of the wool blankets, and watch the storm. The rain comes down in sheets, obscuring the forest beyond the clearing. Lightning flashes occasionally, illuminating the trees in stark white light, followed seconds later by the crack and rumble of thunder echoing off the peaks. It's magnificent and a little frightening, this reminder of nature's power. You're very aware of how small the cabin is, how thin its walls, how much you depend on this simple structure to keep you dry and safe. The storm lasts about an hour, then begins to break up as quickly as it formed. The rain eases to a drizzle, then stops altogether. The clouds tear apart, revealing patches of blue sky and shafts of sunlight that illuminate parts of the forest in brilliant green. Everything is dripping, saturated, alive with moisture. You step outside again. The air smells incredible. That particular scent that comes after rain. All the plant oils and earth smells released by the water. The forest is alive with sound. Dripping water creating a symphony of clips and plops and rushes. A creek you didn't even know was there has appeared, running through the clearing, brown with sediment, but already beginning to clear as the initial surge passes. The evening that follows the storm is particularly beautiful. The sun sinking toward the western peaks, breaks through the remaining clouds and lights everything with that extraordinary clear light that comes after rain. The mountains look freshly scrubbed, their colors deeper and richer. Raindrops cling to every surface, each one a tiny prism, splitting the light into rainbow fragments. You spend that evening much as you spent the previous one. Simple food, tea, the soft glow of the oil lamp. But tonight, you find yourself more comfortable in the silence, less driven to fill it. You sit by the window as darkness falls, watching the stars emerge one by one, and you feel something inside you beginning to unwind. Tensions you didn't even know you were carrying starting to release. The days that follow develop their own rhythm, a pattern that feels ancient and natural despite being new to you. Each morning begins the same way. You wake with the light, that gradual brightening that seeps through the windows and pulls you gently from sleep. There's no jarring alarm, no sudden shock into consciousness. Instead, you drift upward slowly, becoming aware first of the bird's song outside, then the quality of light, then finally the cool air on your face where it's emerged from the blankets during the night. The morning ritual of making the fire becomes meditative. You've gotten better at it over the days. Now you know to arrange the kindling just so, to leave enough space for air to flow, to add the larger pieces gradually rather than all at once. You kneel in front of the stove, feeding it carefully, watching as the flames catch and grow. There's something deeply satisfying about this simple task, about being directly responsible for your own warmth. In the city, heat comes at the turn of a dial, invisible and effortless. Here, you earn it. While the cabin warms, you prepare coffee in the old percolator. The process has become familiar now. You measure the water, add the grounds to the basket, set it on the propane burner, and wait. The smell that fills the cabin as it perks is one of the best parts of the morning. It mingles with the wood smoke and creates a scent that you know you'll always associate with this place. This time, you take your coffee outside, standing on the small porch in your jacket and wool socks, watching the forest wake up. The light at this hour is soft and cool, shadowless. The dew is heavy on everything, turning spider webs into elaborate jewelry, each strand outlined in droplets. The birds are incredibly active. You've started to recognize some of their calls. The varied thrush with its long whistled notes, the Stella's jay with its harsh, scolding voice, the hermit thrush with its spiraling, flute-like song that seems to rise from the forest floor itself. Sometimes a grey jay appears, attracted by the smell of food from the cabin. These birds, also called whiskey jacks or camp robbers, are fearless and clever. They'll land on the porch railing and watch you with bright, curious eyes, waiting to see if you'll offer anything. You've learned not to feed them, despite the temptation. Wild animals should stay wild, should maintain their natural wariness of humans, but you enjoy their company anyway. The way they hop closer, cocking their heads, assessing you with what looks like intelligence and perhaps a touch of humor. After breakfast, which you eat slowly, savoring each bite, you set out to explore. Each day, you choose a different direction, a different trail. One morning, you follow the creek upstream, walking alongside its tumbling water as it descends from somewhere high above. The sound of it is constant, a white noise that somehow enhances rather than disturbs the quietness. The creek bed is strewn with rounded stones, smooth from centuries of water flow, in shades of grey and white, and occasionally a surprising red or green where different minerals have stained the rock. The trail alongside the creek is rough in places, requiring you to scramble over fallen logs and navigate around boulders. The effort focuses your attention completely. You're not thinking about work or obligations or any of the things that normally occupy your mind. You're simply here, placing one foot carefully after another, using your hands to steady yourself, breathing in the cool, moist air that rises from the water. After an hour of climbing, you reach the source. It's not a spring exactly, more a place where the creek emerges from under a massive pile of boulders and broken rock, a talus slope that must have come down from the cliffs above in some ancient rock slide. The water that bubbles out is crystal clear and shockingly cold. You kneel and cup some in your hands, splashing it on your face. It's so cold it almost burns, and it tastes of minerals and stone like drinking the mountain itself. From here, you can see higher into the alpine zone. The trees have thinned out almost completely, replaced by low-growing shrubs and patches of tough alpine grasses. Rock dominates the landscape, grey and broken, piled in chaos from geological forces you can barely comprehend. And above it all, rising another 1,000 meters into the sky, is a peak. It's not one of the famous ones, not Mount Robson or Mount Assiniboine, but it doesn't matter. It's magnificent in its own right. A pyramid of stone, with snow still clinging to its upper faces despite the summer sun. You spend a long time there, sitting on a flat boulder, just looking. The scale is hard to grasp. That peak feels close enough to touch, but you know it must be several kilometers away. The clarity of the mountain air creates this illusion, makes distances deceptive. You could walk all day and not reach the base of that summit. And even if you did, you lack the skills and equipment to go further. This is as close as you'll get, and somehow that's okay. You don't need to conquer it or claim it. It's enough just to see it, to bear witness to its existence. On another day, you follow a trail that leads to an alpine lake. The guidebook you found at the cabin calls it Mirror Lake, though you suspect it has other names, older names, in the languages of the peoples who knew this land before it was mapped and labeled by Europeans. The trail is steep in sections, switchbacking up through zones of different vegetation. You pass through the last of the subalpine fir forest, then through a band of stunted, twisted white bark pines, and finally emerge above the tree line into the alpine proper. The lake sits in a bowl of stone, held in place by a natural dam of rock and gravel, left behind by a glacier thousands of years ago. The water is an impossible shade of blue-green, colored by the glacial flower suspended in it, those tiny particles of rock ground to powder by ice. The surface is perfectly still, reflecting the surrounding peaks with such clarity that for a moment you can't tell where the mountains end and their reflections begin. You walk around the shore, stepping carefully on the loose scree. Tiny plants grow here in the spaces between rocks, miniature versions of species you've seen at lower elevations. There are cushions of moss campion, their small pink flowers clustered tight against the ground to escape the wind. Alpine forget-me-nots add tiny stars of blue. Everything grows low and compact, shaped by the harsh conditions of this elevation, where the growing season might be only 6 or 8 weeks long, and winter winds can reach hurricane force. At the far end of the lake, you find a spot sheltered from the breeze by a large boulder and settle in for lunch. From here, you have an unobstructed view across the water to the peaks beyond. As you eat, you watch the light change on the mountains, clouds casting moving shadows across the rock faces. A pika appears from among the rocks near your feet, carrying a mouthful of grass that it's harvested from somewhere nearby. It stops when it sees you, frozen for a moment, then seems to decide you're not a threat and continues on its way, disappearing into a crack between boulders where it's building its winter hay pile. These small creatures, pikas, are perfectly adapted to life at high elevation, but they're also vulnerable to climate change. They can't tolerate heat, and as temperatures warm, they're being forced to move higher and higher to find the cool conditions they need. Eventually, they'll run out of mountain. The thought saddens you. This idea that future visitors to places like this might find them empty of pikas, their whistling calls silenced. But for now, they're still here, going about their business of survival with that focus and energy that seems to characterize all wild creatures. You finish your lunch and sit for a while longer, reluctant to leave this beautiful spot. The silence up here is profound, broken only by the occasional whistle of a pika or the cry of a golden eagle soaring somewhere overhead. When you finally start back down, your legs are tired and your face is sunburned despite the cool temperature. The descent is harder than the climb in some ways, requiring different muscles, testing your knees and your balance. By the time you reach the cabin, you're thoroughly exhausted, but deeply satisfied. In the afternoons, you've fallen into a pattern. You return to the cabin, feed the fire if it's burned down, and make tea. Then you settle into the old armchair by the window with your book. You're reading slowly, just a chapter or two at a time, letting the words sink in rather than rushing through. The book is a natural history of the Rockies, and it's teaching you about the geology and ecology of this place, giving context to what you're seeing outside the window. You learn about the formation of the mountains, how they were thrust upward between 70 and 50 million years ago when the Pacific Plate collided with the North American Plate. You read about the ice ages, those periods when massive glaciers covered this entire region, advancing and retreating in cycles that lasted tens of thousands of years. The last ice age ended only about 11,000 years ago, which means that in geological terms, this landscape was covered in ice just yesterday. You read about the trees, learning to distinguish between Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir, not just by their overall shape, but by the details of their needles and cones. You discover that the lodgepole pine is so named because indigenous peoples used its straight, tall trunks for the poles of their lodges, and that the tree has a relationship with fire, its cones requiring the heat of a forest fire to open and release their seeds. The book tells you about the animals, their adaptations and behaviors. You learn that grizzly bears can smell food from nearly 20 kilometers away, that they enter a state called torpor during winter, rather than true hibernation, that a large male can weigh up to 300 kilograms. You read about the mountain goats you saw, how their hooves have hard outer shells and soft, grippy inner pads that allow them to cling to seemingly impossible surfaces, how kids can climb with their mothers within days of being born. But the book also spends time on the smaller creatures, the ones you might not notice unless you're paying attention. the snowshoe hare that turns white in winter for camouflage, the boreal toad that can survive being frozen solid, its body producing a kind of antifreeze that protects its cells, the Clark's nutcracker that can remember the locations of thousands of seed caches it makes each fall, finding them again even under meters of snow. Sometimes you put the book down and just watch out the window. The forest is never static. There's always movement, always something happening. A breeze stirs the highest branches of the spruce trees, making them sway in a rhythm that's almost like breathing. A raven lands on a dead snag across the clearing and sits there, preening its feathers with that careful attention to detail that birds employ. Clouds move across the sky, changing the quality of light, making the greens of the forest shift from emerald to olive to almost black. You notice small things you would have missed before, details that urban life trains you to overlook. The way certain trees have been marked by bears, their claws leaving parallel scratches in the bark 8 or 9 feet above the ground. Territorial markers, or maybe just scratching posts. The intricate patterns of lichen on rocks, grey-green and orange and yellow. Organisms that are actually combinations of fungi and algae living in symbiosis, growing so slowly that some of the larger patches might be hundreds of years old. There's a particular chipmunk who seems to have claimed the woodpile as his territory. You see him multiple times a day, scampering across the logs with his tail held high, cheeks bulging with seeds. He's made a burrow somewhere underneath the pile, and you watch as he makes trip after trip, storing food for winter, even though that season is still months away. The instinct to prepare is strong in him, encoded in his genes by thousands of generations of ancestors who survived by planning ahead. One afternoon, you hear a different sound, a rhythmic tapping that takes you a moment to identify. You move to the window and scan the trees until you spot it. A woodpecker, specifically a hairy woodpecker based on its size and markings, working on a dead snag about 30 meters from the cabin. Its head moves in a blur as it hammers at the wood, pausing occasionally to probe with its long tongue for insects in the holes it's creating. The sound echoes through the forest, a staccato beat that seems to measure out time in its own unique way. As you watch, the woodpecker suddenly stops and flies away. A moment later, you see why. A larger bird has landed in the same tree, a Steller's jay, bold and territorial. These jays are the bandits of the forest, not above stealing food from other birds or raiding unattended campsites. This one seems content for now just to claim the tree, sitting there with its impressive blue and black plumage and its distinctive crest raised in what looks like either alarm or aggression. The light in the afternoons has a particular quality that you've come to love. As the sun moves lower in the western sky, it slants through the forest at an angle that seems to make everything glow. Dust motes and pollen drift through the beams of sunlight, creating visible columns of light between the trees. The greens become more saturated, the shadows deeper and more mysterious. It's a time of day that seems suspended somehow, neither quite afternoon nor yet evening, a liminal space where anything feels possible. One afternoon, you hear a sound that makes you freeze. It's a low, huffing, snuffling noise coming from somewhere close to the cabin. You move slowly to the window and look out. There, not 15 meters away, a black bear is ambling through the clearing. It's not particularly large, probably a young male, but it's still an impressive sight. The bear appears completely unconcerned with the cabin or your presence. It's focused on turning over logs and rocks, looking for insects and grubs. You watch, heart pounding, as the bear works its way across the clearing. Its movements are powerful, but somehow graceful. You can see the muscles rippling under its thick coat, can hear the occasional crack as it breaks apart a rotting log. The bear's fur is glossy in the afternoon light, not pure black, but more a deep chocolate brown, particularly along its shoulders and back. Its claws are surprisingly long, curved and powerful, perfect tools for digging and tearing apart wood. The bear pauses suddenly, lifting its head to sniff the air. Its nose is working, testing the scents on the breeze. You hold your breath, not daring to move. Bears have poor eyesight, but an incredible sense of smell. And you wonder if it's caught your scent, if it knows you're watching from inside the cabin. But after a moment, it goes back to its foraging, apparently deciding that whatever it smelled isn't worth investigating. You notice how methodically the bear works. It doesn't just randomly flip logs. Instead, it seems to evaluate each one, perhaps judging by smell or by the age of the wood, whether it's likely to contain the ants and beetle larvae and other insects it's seeking. When it finds a promising log, it rolls it over with astonishing ease, objects that would take considerable human effort to move. Then it uses its claws to tear apart the rotted wood, exposing the insects within, which it licks up with a tongue that looks surprisingly long and dexterous. After perhaps 15 minutes, the bear has worked its way to the edge of the clearing. It pauses one more time, looking back toward the cabin, and for a moment your eyes meet. The bear's eyes are small and dark, difficult to read, but there's an intelligence there, an awareness. Then it turns and ambles into the forest, moving with that characteristic rolling gait, and within moments it's gone, disappeared into the trees as if it had never been there at all. The encounter leaves you shaken, but profoundly exhilarated. This is their home. You're just a visitor. The bear didn't see you as a threat or as food, just as part of the landscape, no more interesting than a tree or a rock. There's something humbling about that, about being rendered insignificant, not through malice, but through simple indifference. You're aware that you've been granted a privilege, a glimpse into the private life of one of the forest's largest inhabitants, and you feel a deep gratitude for the experience. As the days progress, the evenings develop their own special character. After the intensity of the afternoon light, the forest enters a quieter phase as the sun approaches the horizon. The temperature begins to drop, and you feel the need to add an extra layer, pulling on a sweater or wrapping yourself in one of the wool blankets from the bed. This is the time when you often sit on the porch, watching the transformation of the day into night. The process is gradual but inexorable. The bright, clear light of afternoon softens and warms, taking on tones of gold and amber. The mountains to the west are backlit, creating dramatic silhouettes against the sky. Clouds, if there are any, catch fire with color, blazing pink and orange and deep crimson before slowly fading to purple and then grey. The bird activity changes at this hour too. The daytime singers fall silent and new voices emerge. You hear the first tentative hoots of an owl, probably the same great horned owl you've been hearing most nights, warming up for the night's hunting. Occasionally, you catch the harsh, croaking calls of a raven settling in for the night, or the sharp alarm note of a squirrel disturbed by some predator you can't see. There's a magic to this transitional time, a quality of light and sound and smell that seems to exist nowhere else. The air takes on that particular coolness that speaks of approaching night, carrying scents of pine resin and the damp earth of the forest floor. Sometimes there's wood smoke on the breeze, drifting from your own cabin's chimney, a primal smell that humans have associated with safety and home for millennia. You've noticed that the wildlife behaves differently at dusk. Animals that stay hidden during the day emerge now. You've seen deer, mule deer, with their distinctive large ears, stepping delicately into the clearing to browse on the vegetation there. They're alert but not frightened, moving with a grace that seems almost choreographed. Once, just as the last light was fading, you saw what you think was a lynx cross the far edge of the clearing, a glimpse of tufted ears and spotted coat before it vanished into the undergrowth. The transition to full night happens quickly once the sun finally sets behind the western peaks. The afterglow lingers for a while, illuminating the sky with a subtle luminescence, but the forest floor darkens rapidly. This is when you usually go inside, closing the door on the cooling night air and turning to the warmth of the cabin. The evening routine has become comforting in its predictability. You add wood to the stove, building up a good bed of coals that will last for hours. You light the oil lamp, adjusting the wick until the flame burns steady and clean. You prepare dinner, simple meals that nonetheless satisfy in a way that restaurant food somehow doesn't. There's something about the effort involved, the direct relationship between the ingredients and the finished dish, that makes even basic food taste better. After dinner, you wash the dishes in a basin of water heated on the propane stove, a task that in your normal life would feel like a chore, but here becomes almost meditative. The routine of it, the simplicity, the direct engagement with the physical world, all of it feels grounding in a way you haven't experienced in years. Then comes the best part of the evening. You settle into the armchair with a cup of tea, positioned where you can see out the window into the darkness. Sometimes you read, the oil lamp providing just enough light. But more often, you simply sit, watching the night deepen outside, listening to the sounds of the cabin and the forest beyond. The wood in the stove pops and hisses as pockets of moisture or resin heat and expand. The cabin creaks and settles as the temperature drops, its timbers contracting slightly in the cold. Outside, you hear the wind in the treetops, a sound like the ocean, constant and rhythmic. The creak, which you can barely hear during the day, becomes more noticeable at night when other sounds fade. Its voice is steady, unchanging, a reminder that water continues its patient work of shaping the landscape, whether anyone is watching or not. On clear nights, the stars are overwhelming. You turn off the lamp and step outside, letting your eyes adjust to the darkness. It takes several minutes before you can see properly, before the rods in your retinas become sensitive enough to detect the faint light of distant stars. But once they do, the sky is transformed. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light, and you can see why ancient people saw it as a pathway for souls or a road across the heavens. You've started to recognize constellations you never noticed in the light-polluted sky back home. Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the big and little bears spinning around Polaris. Cassiopeia, the queen, in her distinctive W shape. And there, just above the southern horizon, the bright stars of Scorpius, rising as summer reaches its height, standing there in the darkness, surrounded by the forest and the mountains, under a sky ablaze with more stars than you've ever seen. You feel a connection to something vast and ancient. This is what the night sky looked like to your ancestors, to all the countless generations of humans who lived before artificial light. This is what they saw and wondered at and created myths to explain. For a brief time, you're sharing their experience, seeing the universe as they saw it, and it's profound in a way that's difficult to articulate. The cold eventually drives you back inside. You add more wood to the fire and curl up in the bed with all the blankets piled on top of you. The warmth of the wood stove radiates through the cabin, and you can feel it even from across the room, a gentle heat that seems to penetrate all the way to your bones. As you drift towards sleep, you listen to the night sounds, the wind and the creak, and the occasional call of an owl, and you feel safer and more at peace than you have in longer than you can remember. As your time at the cabin draws toward its end, you find yourself experiencing a strange mix of emotions. There's a part of you that's ready to return to civilization, to hot showers and soft beds, and all the conveniences you've been doing without. But there's another part, maybe a larger part, that wants to stay, that has adjusted to this slower rhythm and isn't eager to give it up. You've changed during your time here in ways both obvious and subtle. Your body has adapted to the routine of physical activity, to the daily walks and climbs, to the work of maintaining the fire and hauling water. You move differently now, more deliberately, more aware of your balance and your breathing. The altitude doesn't bother you as much as it did at first. Your lungs have adjusted, producing more red blood cells to carry oxygen through your thinned blood. But the changes go deeper than the physical. Your mind feels different too, clearer somehow, less cluttered, without the constant input of news and social media, without the endless stream of notifications and demands on your attention. You've discovered a kind of mental spaciousness you'd forgotten was possible. Thoughts arise and pass naturally rather than being interrupted. You can follow an idea all the way through instead of being pulled away by the next ping or buzz. You've also become attuned to subtler things. You notice changes in the weather before they happen, reading the signs in the clouds and the wind, in the behavior of the animals. You can tell time by the position of the sun and the quality of the light. You've learned to distinguish between different bird calls, to identify trees by their bark and needles, to walk quietly enough that you don't disturb the creatures around you. There's something about living closely with nature, even for just a few days, that recalibrates your sense of what's important. The things that seemed urgent back in the city feel less pressing from here. Email can wait. Projects can be delayed. The constant striving for more, for better, for different, fades into the background. Here, you have everything you need: shelter, warmth, food, water, beauty. What else is there really? You've also had time to think, to really think, without distraction or interruption. Long thoughts that unfold over hours as you walk or sit by the window. Thoughts about your life, about the choices you've made, and the ones you want to make going forward. About what brings you joy and what drains you. About the people and places and experiences that matter most. The cabin has become more than just shelter. It's become a retreat in the truest sense, a place where you've retreated from the world, not to escape it, but to gain perspective on it. From this vantage point, both literally and figuratively elevated above your normal existence, you can see patterns you missed before, can understand things that were too close to comprehend. On your last full day, you decide not to go anywhere. Instead, you stay close to the cabin, moving slowly through the clearing and the nearby forest, paying attention to details you might have overlooked in your eagerness to explore further afield. You notice the way moss grows thicker on the north side of trees, a natural compass that works even without technology. You examine lichen up close, marveling at its intricate structures, understanding for the first time that what looks like a single organism is actually two, fungus and algae, living together in a relationship so close they appear as one. You find animal tracks near the creek, pressed into soft mud, deer tracks, the distinctive heart-shaped prints, and there, overlaying them, the massive five-toed print of a bear, probably the same one you saw a few days ago. The track is fresh, made sometime this morning while you were inside making breakfast. The bear passed within meters of the cabin, going about its business while you sat drinking coffee, two lives intersecting without either being aware of the other. You sit by the creek for a long time, just watching the water move over and around the stones. It's mesmerizing the way it constantly changes, yet remains somehow the same. The patterns shift and reform. Eddies appear and disappear, but the creek continues its ancient work of carrying water and sediment from the high places to the low. This creek has been here for thousands of years, will be here for thousands more, long after you and everyone you know are gone. There's comfort in that continuity, in being part of something so much larger than yourself. In the afternoon, clouds build over the peaks as they have most days. You watch them develop, great towers of cumulus that darken at their bases, and you're not surprised when the rain begins to fall. It's gentle at first, a soft pattering on the cabin roof, but gradually intensifies. You're inside, warm and dry, watching the forest transform in the rain. Everything becomes more vivid in the rain. The greens deeper, the browns richer. The bark of the trees turns dark and glossy. Water drips from every surface, creating a symphony of different sounds. Heavy drops falling from high branches, lighter rain hitting leaves, the rush of water running in temporary streams down the slope behind the cabin. There's something profoundly peaceful about being in a dry, warm cabin while rain falls outside. It creates a sense of enclosure, of protection that might be hardwired into human psychology from our evolutionary past. The rain continues for most of the afternoon, heavier at times, lighter at others, but never quite stopping. You make tea and sit by the window, wrapped in a blanket, and let your mind wander where it will. As evening approaches and the rain finally ends, you step outside into a world made new. Everything is dripping, saturated, alive with moisture. The air smells incredible. All the plant scents released by the rain, mixing with the smell of wet earth and stone. A fog has formed, drifting through the trees in ghostly wisps, obscuring and revealing, making the familiar forest seem mysterious and unknowable. You walk a short way up the trail, moving quietly through the wet forest. The light is strange, filtered through clouds and mist, sourceless and diffuse. Sounds are muffled, distance is hard to judge. It feels like walking through a dream, and you move slowly, taking it all in, knowing this is one of your last chances to experience this place. When you return to the cabin, the sky is clearing from the west, and shafts of late sunlight are breaking through, illuminating parts of the forest in brilliant green against the darker background. It's that particular quality of light that comes after rain, when the air is scrubbed clean and every particle of moisture acts as a tiny lens. The mountains emerge from the clouds, their peaks glowing in alpine glow. that phenomenon where they seem lit from within. You spend your last evening much as you've spent all the others, but with a heightened awareness, trying to memorize every detail. The feel of the worn wood of the cabin floor under your feet, the smell of wood smoke and pine, the sound of the creek and the wind in the trees, the particular creak that the door makes when you open it, the way the oil lamp casts shadows on the log walls. You know you'll forget most of this. That memory is imperfect and fades, but you also know that something essential will remain, some sense memory or emotional residue that will stay with you. The feeling of this place, the peace it brought you, the way it changed something fundamental in how you see the world and your place in it. On your last morning, you wake early before dawn. The cabin is cold as always, but you don't bother with the fire. Instead, you dress quickly in your warmest clothes and step outside. The stars are still visible, though fading as the eastern sky begins to brighten. A pre-dawn stillness holds the forest, that particular quality of quiet that exists only in the moments before the sun rises. You walk through the darkness to the meadow you visited on that first afternoon, finding your way more by feel than sight, your eyes adjusted to the darkness, your feet somehow knowing where to step. The meadow is even darker than the forest, open to the sky but not yet touched by light. You find a spot on the same rock where you sat days ago and settle in to wait, facing east. The transformation is gradual, almost imperceptible at first. The sky lightens from black to deep blue, then to a pale grey blue at the horizon. Individual features of the landscape begin to emerge from the darkness. The line of trees at the meadow's edge, the shapes of distant peaks, closer details, the rocks and plants around you. Then, suddenly, it's happening. The very first rays of sunlight touch the highest peaks, igniting them in shades of pink and gold and orange. It's called alpine glow, and you've seen it before from the cabin, but experiencing it from here, from this meadow with its unobstructed view, is something else entirely. The peaks seem to be on fire, glowing with an inner light that's almost supernatural in its intensity. The light moves slowly down the mountainsides as the sun rises higher, illuminating more and more of the landscape. The colors shift and change, from the intense reds and golds of the first light to softer pinks, and then to the clear white light of morning. The whole process takes maybe 10 minutes, but it feels both longer and shorter. Time doing that strange thing it does when you're completely absorbed in something. When it's done, when the peaks are bathed in normal daylight and the magic of alpine glow has faded, you sit for a few more minutes, just breathing, just being. You feel grateful, overwhelmingly so, for having been here, for having had this experience. Grateful for the cabin and the mountains and the forest. Grateful for the elk and the bear and the beakers. Grateful for the stars and the storms and the profound silence. Grateful for the opportunity to step outside your normal life and remember what it feels like to be part of the natural world rather than separate from it. You return to the cabin and pack your few belongings slowly, methodically. You make sure the fire is completely out, stirring the ashes and checking for any hidden coals. You clean the stove, sweep the floor, wash the dishes one last time, and put them away on the shelf where you found them. You make the bed with fresh sheets from the small linen closet, preparing it for the next visitor. You check the propane tank and make sure the valve is closed tight. This is part of the ethic of such places. This care for what comes next. You leave the cabin better than you found it if possible, or at least no worse. You leave enough kindling split and stacked for the next person to easily start their first fire. You make sure there's plenty of firewood under cover, protected from rain and snow. These small acts of courtesy to strangers you'll never meet feel important, part of the unwritten code that allows places like this to exist. As you drive away, following that rough track back towards civilization, you keep looking in the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of the cabin through the trees until finally it's out of sight completely. But you know it will still be there, standing among the spruce and fir, smoke rising from its chimney when the next visitor arrives, offering its simple shelter to whoever needs it. The experience stays with you. In the days and weeks that follow, you find yourself thinking about the cabin, about the mountains and the forest, about the quality of silence and the depth of stars. You've brought something back with you, some small piece of that peace, that connection to rhythms older and deeper than the artificial ones that structure most of our lives. The Canadian Rockies will continue their ancient processes. The glaciers will advance and retreat, though mostly retreat now as the climate changes. The elk will continue their seasonal migrations. The bears will den up when winter comes, and the ptarmigan will turn white to match the snow. The stars will wheel overhead as they have for billions of years, and the mountains will stand, patient and eternal, measuring time not in human lifespans, but in the slow grinding of continents and the patient work of ice and water. And somewhere among those peaks and valleys, the cabin still sits, waiting. A small point of warmth and shelter in the vastness of the wilderness. A place where anyone who needs it can step outside the rushing stream of modern life and remember what it feels like to be part of something larger, something older, something that continues regardless of our presence or absence. If you've enjoyed this journey to the Canadian Rockies, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to the channel and perhaps giving this video a gentle like. It helps others find these stories, these moments of peace and quiet in our often too loud world. But mostly, I hope this has given you a little rest, a small escape into the kind of wild places where the soul can breathe and remember itself. Thank you for traveling with me tonight. Sleep well, wherever you are.